In this video, I want to share my best tips and tricks when it comes to using an action camera for mountain biking. A lot of questions have been coming up recently, and they have done for years, with what camera I use, how I edit my videos, how I export them, how I upload them. So I wanted to break everything down in one video. So this is going to be your go-to video for everything related to action cameras and mountain biking. Now I know there's a lot of action camera tutorials already on YouTube and on the internet, but I feel I can bring a lot to the table with my experience in mountain biking and shooting point of view videos. So I'm going to give you a bit of my story first, then we'll jump into the cameras I use, how to choose the right camera, the settings I use, how I mount my camera to the different helmets I have, how I shoot the footage, as well as editing and uploading social media. So I've been using action cameras now for 10 or 15 years, roughly. Probably more like 10 years actually. I literally have been filming and making videos since I started mountain biking, which was back when I was maybe 15 years old. And if I look back now, I've actually been using action cameras for most of that time, or some sort of camera, to document my progress, journey, and share it with the world. It hasn't always been a profession like it is now. Mountain biking for me is still an outlet, it's something I really enjoy doing. And I've always enjoyed picking up a camera and documenting what I'm doing. Whether it is to share it on the internet or just for my own personal possession. But I really do feel that action cameras have given me the majority of the lifestyle I have now and have enabled me to turn mountain biking, which was a hobby, to now into a profession as a full-time professional mountain biker. When it comes to the cameras I use, I primarily use Insta360 cameras, and I have done for years now. I have used other brands in the past, and I don't want this just to be an Insta360 tutorial. What I'm going to share in this video will work regardless of what camera you have, but I will be showing some of the editing and shooting tips with these cameras. That's what I actually use. When it comes to cameras, there's two cameras that I primarily use when I am shooting my mountain bike videos. That is the Insta360 Ace Pro 2. So this is just a single lens action camera. It's really powerful. It's Insta360's latest camera as of making this video. It is incredible out the box for beginners, and it also has some very advanced settings in here as well for advanced people who want to get a little bit more personal with the outcome of their videos. Now, one of the other types of cameras I use, which is probably one of my favorites, is a 360 action camera. This is the Insta360 X4. You'll notice this is a lot different than a standard action camera because it has two lenses. So it's got one lens on either side of the camera, and what this does is it films in a sphere and films literally everything. If you are looking to create really immersive point of view videos for action sports or even just vlogging, this camera is insane. Another good thing I love about this camera is you don't need to worry too much about where it's pointing. With a standard action camera, you have to make sure the lens is pointed exactly where you want the frame to be because it's only one lens. With this, we do a lot of the post-production reframing afterwards, so we can literally point where we want our videos to look. I'm going to show you where I mount these cameras on my helmet in a second, but I use a mix of standard action cameras and 360 footage. I use a lot of 360 action camera footage for my social media like Instagram and things. I think it does a really good job of creating nice vertical videos that are just really crisp, really high quality, and actually brings the audience into my videos and actually makes them feel like they were riding the section of trail I'm filming. Now, when it comes to helmets, there's two types of helmets I use. So I have my open face helmet. I use this for like e-biking and trail riding. And I also have my big full face helmet for more extreme stuff like freeride and downhill. The way I mount these cameras to these helmets are a little bit different. We'll start with the trail helmet, and I use sticky mounts that go underneath my peak, and you can get these on Amazon or from pretty much any camera company. They come with these sticky mounts. I have seen people using stick-on mounts on top of the helmet and on the side, but for me personally, I feel with a mount of the camera underneath my peak, I'm able to get such a better angle of view. So with my Ace Pro, it comes with this handy little magnet, and this is like a quick release magnet that basically clips underneath the camera like this. And what we're able to do here is mount our camera under the peak. That's one type of mount that I use. So this is great for landscape videos. I mainly use it for, so we'll put a video on the screen now so you can see what this looks like. But I really like this mount. And the same goes for my 360 camera. So this is generally how I mount the camera. I mount it under the peak. Depending on what helmet you have, this might feel a little bit strange to start because obviously the camera's got a little bit of weight in it and it's hanging off the front of your helmet. If you've got a good helmet and the helmet really does sit on your head good, this shouldn't be a problem. Like my 6D helmet sits on my head really good. I can tighten the back and it doesn't move or wobble about or make me feel like I've got a big weight on the front of my helmet. So I think it's really comfortable and I could ride all day with this if I wanted to, but I generally just use a 360 camera for little clips here and there. I don't just keep this on all the time. Whereas if I was mounting this camera to my helmet, I could just leave this on all day, no problem. It's not too heavy, it doesn't really obtrude anything. I mean, neither of these cameras get in the way of eyesight at all or vision, so it allows me to ride at my best. Now my next helmet is my full face, and you can see here we have two different mounts for this. We've got a chin mount and we've got under the peak. Again, you can mount cameras to the top of these helmets, you can mount them to the back, the side, which I've seen people doing, but I really do like these two mounted positions, or mounted to the visor. I think they just give the best all-round performance. Now, up until very recently, I've been using 360 cameras to film pretty much all of my YouTube videos. It does take a little bit more work, but I just think the outcome is just so bang on. But recently I've been experimenting with the Ace Pro 2, mounted like this, on the chin. And I'll put some footage on the screen now to show what that looks like, but I think it's really immersive. It's really, really action orientated. It's just a really good angle. And obviously this doesn't get in the way at all. It's nice and neat and tucked away in there. And for anyone asking what mount I use to mount the camera to the helmet, this is a Nartec mount, which I don't know if they're still making them or not, but if they are, that's the one I use, and it's just zip tied to my helmet, so it works literally with any helmet. I like those. Stay tuned as well, we are going to be coming out with an actual special helmet camera mount, which I'm excited about. I also use this setup as well a lot. This is the X4 mounted to the chin. You can see that it sticks down a little bit lower. I generally use this for shooting landscape videos for YouTube. And again, I'll put some on the screen now so you can see what it looks like, but I really think this is the best of both worlds when it comes to immersive content and super, super wide footage. I think that is the ultimate combination, and I really like using 360 cameras. I just love the fact you don't have to think about where they're pointing, you just shoot everything and then worry about everything else later. And I also mount my camera here as well, so you can see there, it's like quite streamlined under the visor, doesn't get in the way, doesn't look too out of place. Doesn't look out of place at all, actually. This angle is so good for social media content, similar to how the 360 camera would capture videos on the open face helmet. This is the helmet and setup I use for some of the bigger features that I ride. Now let's jump into some of the settings on your cameras, because settings are something that really do they help enhance your videos basically. Now both these cameras, in fact most action cameras, are really good nowadays, and you can just take them out the box and with minimal setup you can hit record and you can capture some epic videos. But I like to take things a little bit further and add a bit more creative style to my videos, and you might be the same when it comes to color grading, having a certain style to your footage, and this is where the settings come in. So I'm going to run you through some of the basics here, and first thing we'll talk about is resolution. So this camera can shoot at 8K, which is crazy. I don't shoot at 8K because I don't have the need to. I generally shoot around 5.7K or 4K. Once it's posted on YouTube or Instagram, the platforms compress this footage and it doesn't really matter anyway, but I do want to try and retain as much quality as I can from the videos. And also file size. If you shoot a 1080 video and then you shoot a 4K video, the 4K video is probably going to be 4 times the file size. If you shoot an 8K video, it's going to be like 8 times the size of the file. So you're going to run out of space pretty quickly, and the camera's battery isn't going to be as long because it's using so much power to document and store all this footage. So I shoot probably 4K on most occasions, and on the 360 camera I actually shoot 5.7K. I think that's optimal and just really does perform really well at that. The next thing we'll talk about is frame rate. So frame rate is something that confuses people, and as an industry standard I would say most people who post on social media should just be shooting at 30 frames a second. That's a really good standard to aim for. It's gonna give you that highest quality look to your videos, but it's also going to allow you to pinpoint on certain keyframes if you want, which I'll show you in post-production what I'm talking about. But you can also go down to as low as 24 frames a second. This is going to give your footage a very cinematic feel. So you're going to probably get some more motion blur on the side of your frame. Generally cinematography stuff, if you go to the movies, they'll use 24 frames a second because that's, I think, what the eye can see. But if you want to have like a go-to, I would just say 30 frames a second. It's pretty good for all platforms. And then if you want to do slow motion, I would go up to 60 or even 120 frames a second, just so you can really slow that footage down and still retain that smoothness to your videos. White balance is a question I get a lot asked about, and white balance is basically the temperature of your videos. I'll increase the temperature now of this bit of footage to a warm temperature, and then I'll decrease it down to a cold temperature, and you can see the difference. Depending on what you want your outcome to look like, you can play around with the white balance. You can set it on automatic so the camera will figure out what setting to have it on, but I think that just creates too much change in your videos, especially if you're mountain biking in different locations. So I generally stick to around 5,000K, roughly 5,500K. Stabilization, every action camera nowadays has got some really good built-in stabilization. The stabilization on this camera and my 360 camera is crazy good. It has 3 settings on here, which is low, standard, and high. And I generally shoot in standard stabilization. I don't even go to the high mode, because if I go to the high mode, it doesn't actually add more stabilization. What it does is it crops in the frame. So you actually lose a little bit of the width of your frame. And when it comes to mountain biking, I want the widest frame possible. So I tend to go with standard, which is really, really good anyway. Sharpness, again, a lot of people ask me, how do you get such crisp, sharp videos? A secret here is actually to shoot your videos in the lowest sharpness the camera has. So I actually shoot sharpness on this in low. You can add sharpness in your post-production, but you can't reduce the sharpness in post-production. Film in low sharpness and then increase after if you want. If it's fine, then just leave it. But that's how I think about sharpness. Then we have something called EV comp, and EV comp is something I use a fair bit to retain shadows. So it's kind of like the exposure on your videos or your settings. And I usually drop that to around minus 0.3. And all this does, it's going to give your videos a little bit of a darker look. When it comes to editing them afterwards, you'll have much more room to play with because you can bring the colors back out in it. And when it comes to colors, I generally just shoot standard on this camera because I think it's a really good natural feel. If you want to get a bit more creative with your footage, you may want to experiment filming in a flat color profile. You can reintroduce the colors that you want in post-production. But I generally just use standard. I think that is a really natural feel to the camera. And these latest action cameras now almost all have inbuilt presets. So you can just go through it and see which one you want. Shutter speed, I generally leave the shutter speed on automatic because the camera is just so good at deciding what the shutter speed needs to be, especially if I'm going in and out of the trees, different lighting conditions. Like if I set the shutter speed at like 1 speed, there's a high chance the footage will be either shaky because the stabilization can't cope with the shutter speed depending on the light. Now, the one time I will lock the shutter speed is if I use an ND filter. So ND filters are basically a lens that goes over your lens and it blocks out light. So you can control how much light is coming into the camera, which then means you can lock your shutter speed and you can create a much more natural feel to your videos. I really do like using ND filters. You have to have quite a lot of light to use them in the first place. So it's really good to use ND filters if the sky is clear and blue, it's really sunny, you can whack an ND filter on there and it really, really looks very, very realistic. ISO is another interesting question I get asked a lot about, and ISO is basically your way of manipulating the light and introducing artificial light into your videos. So I hope this isn't too confusing, but if you're in and out of the woods, in dark woods like I am in Scotland, I generally have my ISO set quite high. So I have the minimum set at 100 and the maximum set around 1,600. So that's a really big dynamic range. So the camera can work between those two parameters. Whereas if I'm filming in the open, in bright blue skies, I'll just set the ISO at 100 minimum and maximum, as low as it'll go, because I don't want the camera to introduce any more artificial light. I want it all to be natural, and I want the camera to just do its thing and give me the best performance possible. But if you increase the ISO, it can have the opposite effects. And you'll start seeing noise in your videos, you'll start seeing like lower quality when it's dark in the woods. So you don't want that. And this goes for both standard action cameras and 360 cameras. Now let's go upstairs to my computer and I'm going to take you through my post-production process so you can literally just model it and really get the best out of your camera. All right, so I'm at my computer now, and the first thing I'm going to do is take out the SD card from the camera. Before we start any editing or anything like that, I like to transfer all of my footage from the SD card to a hard drive. Now this is a lacy hard drive. I've got quite a few of these, quite rugged, great hard drive. And I also have one of these as well, which is a solid state hard drive as well. So these are a bit faster to edit from. But generally, I'll transfer all my footage to start with from the card to the hard drive. Mainly so I have a backup just in case anything corrupts on the card or anything, but also it's going to be much faster to edit and do any post-production work on the video footage when it's on a hard drive versus from the micro SD card. So we'll go ahead and do that now, and then we'll jump over to my screen. So now I've transferred my footage from the micro SD card to my hard drive. There's two platforms or two programs that I use for editing. I use Final Cut Pro and I use Insta360 Studio for editing a lot of the footage on my 360 camera. Now I've been using Final Cut Pro and iMovie for as long as I can remember. So iMovie was the first free program I used, and then I went to Final Cut Pro. You can get a free trial of Final Cut Pro for like 90 days, and then it's a one-time payment, which I know there are other softwares out there like Adobe Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve, but I just like using Final Cut Pro. I think it's a really good platform. It's really easy for me to move around with. But the actual editing process I'll take you through on both these, on this platform, is going to be the same with whatever platform you're editing on. Okay, so I've created this folder here inside my hard drive called Test, and we've got one video from my Ace Pro 2, the standard action camera, and then we've got a 360 file here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Final Cut Pro. I'm going to create a new project. And before I do this, I'm going to be focused on this in this tutorial. I'm going to show you the bits that I think are important. So it's not going to be a complete editing tutorial, but I'm going to show you how to set your projects up, and then how to do a bit of color grading, how to do the 360 reframing, and then exporting settings for social media, which is really important. So we're going to go create a new project. I'm going to just call this Test. And the video here, I'll just keep it 4K. This is like the outcome of what you want your video to be, sorry. So let's say, for example, this is going to be for YouTube. These are the settings here I would use. The rate here, the frame rate, needs to be the same frame rate as what you shot on your camera. So if you shot 24 frames a second, you select this. If you shot at 30, you shoot this. And then I would just keep the rendering at Apple ProRes 422. Keep the audio the same and click OK. And then there's many different ways you can transfer your footage in here, but I'm just literally going to drag and drop here. What I'm going to show you now, I'm just going to cut this to a short bit of video. It's my recent trip to a bike park. I'll just literally cut this here because I don't need much to do some color grading. Once we have our video footage here, I just scan through it, just have a quick look at it and just see what the color looks like. So let's just choose this frame here. Oh. This is what we're going to work on. So in the right bar here, the right section here, we've got our color grading tab, and there's a lot of different tutorials on the internet about how to color grade and edit footage, but what I like to do is create something called a color wheel. I like doing this, and if you see here, it gives us global adjustments. This will adjust everything: saturation, highlights and shadows, so brighter, darker, You can double click these arrows to put them back to the middle. Then we can pull these around here as well for an overall globally warmer footage or globally colder footage, and double tap back to the middle. And then we can individually adjust the shadows, the highlights, and the midtones. So shadows, you see here the effect this has. Too dark and too light, you'll lose a lot of the image. Very saturated or very desaturated shadows. Same with the highlights, very saturated highlights. So the highlights are basically the white sections in the video and the frame, and the shadows are the dark sections. And the midtones are kind of cover everything in between. So the midtones I feel have more of an effect overall than the shadows and highlights. But again, it depends what feel you want to have with your video, because there's infinite different things we can edit here. Then we have the temperature, like I was showing you earlier, but we can actually adjust the overall feel of the clip to be much colder or much warmer. Again, I like to go with around 5,500 K. Got tints here, a green tint or more of a purpley tint, pink. I don't really play with this too much. And then the hue as well. I don't really play around with this too much. What I mainly play around with is these two tabs here, the shadows and the highlights. So I generally will try and drag down the shadows a little bit, and then the highlights up a little bit. And then I will increase the shadow saturation just to give it a little bit more color. So I like how the gloves are popping there. So you see, if we scroll back through the footage now, it's very red, which is not really what I want, which could be probably is the shadows. You see there, the shadows are changing color. It's important to adjust your footage and then take a look at it. Because if you adjust one frame and you're riding quite a dynamic setting where you're changing light and things, it's gonna look totally different. Yeah, it's not too much adjustment, but depends what you want out of your video. Actually adjust all these here on sliders as well, so this is going to adjust the same settings as these wheels, but it's just a slider bar, so that might be easier for you. That's generally how I color grade footage, and there's many different ways you can do it, but I quite like just keeping things really simple, and that's how I color grade footage. And when it comes to exporting, once you're happy with your video, obviously you're going to have more clips than this. And here's the top right here, and click export. I already have a preset here for YouTube. So you're going to name it. And then on the settings bar here, this is the important section. So if it's for YouTube specifically, I would just keep this as social platforms. It does a pretty good job. You'll notice as well, if you change these like to video and audio, you'll see the file size just leaps up. It can be quite big. I just go social platforms. And video codec, I do keep it H.264. I think that's a really good color bit profile. And I usually go multipass, which is better. So just give it, like, the computer basically just runs over the footage twice or maybe even more, just to really make my video look at the highest quality it can be. Resolution, if you want to upload in 4K, you want this resolution here, and then that's pretty much it. And then you click next, and it'll give you an option of where to save your video, and you just click save, and that's it. So the next tutorial is going to be for 360 videos. So I'm going to double tap on my 360 file, and this is going to open up Insta360 Studio. This is the piece of software that I use for editing 360 videos. Let's reset all this. You'll notice here that's funny. Let's fast forward a bit. These guys wear it no tops. Okay, so you'll see here that the software is very different to Final Cut Pro. On the left here we have all our files, in the middle we have our timeline, on the right here we have more settings. So On the right here we can choose stabilization type. I generally use flow state stabilization on. There's no reason why you would turn it off. Direction lock I'm not going to use on this one. Lens stitching. So Insta360 has an option to include a dive case or a protective lens. I don't use any of that, so I just put normal and tell the stitching settings that I just want you to stitch the two lenses together without a lens. I'm going to leave all these settings as they already are. I don't do any image processing in here. All I'm doing is reframing in this program. And then we can add a logo. I mean, I don't really know why you'd want to add a logo to your footage, but there you go. You can do that. And then we have the information of your clip as well if you're interested in bitrate, frame rate, resolution, file size, all that stuff. So let's just come back to the center stage here. First thing I'm going to do here, let's say we're going to make an Instagram clip. So we want to post a clip, an Instagram reel to Instagram. And first things first, we're going to select our section. So in the timeline, you're going to drag this white bar to the start of your clip, or you can use Command and the left bracket, and it will pull the timeline in and trim your clip. And then you want to do the same for the end of the clip. Don't worry too much right now about the angle or anything. We're going to sort that out in a second. We're just going to pick a 15-second clip, and we're going to do the right bracket and Command, and then that's our clip to start. Back to start. Here we go. So now we want to reframe. So reframing, if we look around, look, this is the 360 camera. It's mounted on my chin, and it allows me to spin the camera around and choose where I want the camera to point. And I can zoom in and out using my tracking pad. And I have all sorts of settings. In a second I'll show you. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to change the aspect ratio, because right now it's 16:9. We want 9:16, which is going to be for vertical videos. So you can see here we can choose from all different sizes. And this is our aspect ratio. And we're going to add a keyframe to start with. So we're going to click add this keyframe right at the very start of our video. And then now we have all these settings that come up. Crystal ball, which is I think a bit weird. Tiny planet, also very strange. Mega view, ultra wide, and D-warp. I generally have this to mega view. These are just basically parameters that they're set up, but then when you start moving your fingers around your mouse and making adjustments, it will change all this anyway. Now, I like to make sure the visor is not showing in my footage. So I'm going to just click and drag down. And if you use two fingers on a tracking pad on a Mac, you can actually decide where you can zoom in or out just to really get selective how it looks. And you can also add, well, distortion control and FOV controls is what I mainly like using. So distortion, generally keep around 0.34, and then I adjust the FOV based on the distortion. So now I'm going to come out a little bit like this. So we've got 81 and 0.52. That's kind of how it's sat now. I'm going to play my footage now, and then I'm going to place another keyframe as the trail starts to turn and twist. So we're changing direction, so I'm going to just click and drag around so I'm kind of central. The thing with keyframes, let's zoom in a bit here, you want to kind of add these quite sparingly as well, because if you add too many, it doesn't look very realistic. So I usually add keyframes at the start and the end of every change in direction. So I'll just show you now what this looks like. You see it turn in, and then turn down the hill there, just a little bit. Now you can also adjust the transition period between each keyframe. So if we click this thin yellow line, we've got smooth dissolve, slip in, fade out, slip in, fade out, Slip in, slip out, fade in, fade out. Now if I click fade in, fade out, you'll see how the camera transitions between the two keyframes very differently. Watch this. It's got a very different characteristic. Now, I generally just like to keep this on smooth dissolve. So if I click, so let's try slip in, fade out. Just want to set that as well. It's not very natural to me at all, so I do like to just keep them all smooth dissolves for this example. Now you'll notice as well in the trees, there's a lot of detail going on here, so I generally find action cameras are best when there's as much light as possible coming in. So this isn't the best setting really for any camera because it's got a lot of scattered light, loads of trees, kind of hard for the image to decide what to focus on. But it's doing its best, which is pretty good. So you basically work through your footage until you reach the end of your clip, and you see there, it's just showing my visor, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I'll get rid of that. But you'll notice here that if you add too many keyframes too close to each other like this, it will tend to feel like it's jumping between keyframes, which is not what we want at all. So if we use, show you what direction lock does. What you can do with direction lock is you can lock it, put a keyframe in here, and it will generally try and track where the camera is facing. So let me just restart this and get rid of the keyframe and show you again. Clear all the keyframes and back to start, reposition this, turn direction lock on, and then put a keyframe here. Now let's see what happens now. So you can see the camera is trying to follow where the lens is facing, which is pretty good, quite a natural feel, but you've still got the visor in different points, which I don't think is very cool. So I like to go through my footage if I'm using direction lock for any reason and just reposition the camera slightly. Same again there, it's just clipping a little bit. Let's see this now. Back to the start, play it. It's kind of cool. Alright, so once you're happy with your clip and you want to export it, this is very crucial, this section, so I'm going to trim this to the end here. So when we're ready to export, we're going to click the export button up here. And this is the important bit which a lot of people want the information on. So choose your file name to start with. This could just be test, whatever you want to call it. Choose where you want to save it. So just for good organization, I'm going to add it to the same place. And then the bit rate is important depending on where you want the video to be used. Because if you put a too high bit rate, like 200, you'll also see the file size increases here. But if you're using this clip for Instagram, for example, and you go with a 200 megabyte per second bit rate, it is going to compress this video a lot, and you're going to end up more than likely with a very low quality video. So for Instagram, I like to go between about 25 and 40. Resolution for a vertical video is 1080 by 920, keep that the same. Frame rate, that will just automatically be what it's set at. Encoding format, keep this as H.264 or ProRes 422. I probably would go ProRes 422 actually. Now the file size will increase, but it just means that you're going to have less chance of this video losing any quality from the editing you've just done right now. So that's how I would export my 360 footage for an Instagram clip. So that's pretty much everything I know right now about action cameras for mountain biking. I hope this tutorial was very useful for you, and I will leave links below to all these cameras and any of the resources, as well as my action camera settings cheat sheet, which you can grab below. Any comments, put them in there and I'll get back to you. And YouTube will recommend some videos up here. It's pretty smart, so you should go and check these out next.